One faded hoodie, one cruel remark, and one silent crowd. No one imagined that the boy she shamed would be the one to change everything. The afternoon sun spilled over the city like a warm golden glaze, painting the streets with a glow that softened even the harshest corners of brick and glass. It was one of those days that seemed to hum with energy, the kind where the world felt alive, every corner pulsing with motion. The shopping district stretched in both directions, its narrow lanes packed with boutiques boasting wide glass windows, cafes spilling with laughter, and pop-up stands where vendors called out to passers-by with offers too good to ignore. Children tugged on their parents' hands, pointing excitedly at racks of colorful toys. Groups of teenagers wandered together, their conversations punctuated with bursts of laughter that floated through the air like music. A busker stood at the edge of the street, strumming a guitar and singing with a raspy voice, his case already sprinkled with coins. The scent of roasted coffee beans mingled with the sweetness of freshly baked pastries, drifting from a nearby bakery, creating an aroma so inviting that pedestrians slowed their steps. Tempted to step inside from above, banners swayed lazily in the breeze, announcing seasonal sales and upcoming events. The crowd moved as though part of a single rhythm, some drifting into boutiques with glass doors that clicked shut behind them, others pausing at outdoor stalls to examine handmade jewelry or try on sunglasses with mirrored lenses that reflected the sky. There was a sense of possibility in the air, as though every purchase, every chance encounter might turn the afternoon into something extraordinary. The sidewalks gleamed faintly, still damp from the street cleaners who had passed through earlier. Light caught on the water, scattering tiny diamonds across the pavement. The hum of the city wasn't harsh or overwhelming here, it was more like a steady heartbeat. Conversations layered over the rumble of traffic in the distance, the hiss of espresso machines, and the occasional burst of music from shop speakers. It was a scene that carried both comfort and promise. On the surface, everything looked ordinary, even idyllic. Yet beneath that brightness, there was a subtle tension, almost invisible. Like the faint shift in the wind before a storm, the air carried a whisper that something small but significant was about to happen. At the center of it all stood a boutique that seemed to command attention without effort. Its name glimmered in silver letters above the door, catching the sunlight at just the right angle. Inside, sleek mannequins posed in carefully styled outfits, their glossy surfaces gleaming as though they belonged on a runway. The storefront radiated exclusivity, drawing in the curious and the confident alike. It was the kind of place where people went not just to shop, but to be seen, to prove if only for an afternoon that they belonged among the fashionable elite. Just outside its window display, a small group of women in tailored dresses lingered, pointing at the clothing inside. They spoke in low voices, their laughter polite but tinged with judgment, like the sound of crystal glasses clinking together. Across the street, a pair of college students sat on the cafe terrace, sipping iced coffees and scrolling through their phones. Between them, a notebook lay open, filled with doodles and half-finished plans. The sun shifted slightly, sending shadows crawling across the pavement. A delivery man maneuvered his cart through the crowd, muttering apologies as he bumped against shoulders. A cyclist rang his bell, weaving past the throng of shoppers with practiced ease. Somewhere, a car horn blared, sharp and impatient, before fading into the distance. Life moved in layers, each detail adding to the rich tapestry of the afternoon. And yet, within that tapestry, threads of fate were slowly pulling together. The crowd did not notice it. The women outside the boutique did not sense it. The students at the cafe remained oblivious, caught up in their own world. But the air knew. The sunlight seemed to hold its breath, waiting. There was a stillness buried beneath the bustle, a quiet shift just out of reach. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it lingered there, pressing faintly against the chest like the pause before a word that changes everything. The shopping district so alive, so full of laughter, music, and motion was on the edge of something it did not yet understand. Soon, the golden glow of the afternoon would no longer feel as safe. Soon, that hum of life would bend into silence, broken only by words that cut deeper than they seemed. For now, though, the world basked in sunlight, moving in rhythm, unaware of the moment that would divide the day into a before and an after. Marcus lingered at the edge of the crowd, his gaze fixed on the glass window of the boutique. At 16, he had already grown accustomed to being invisible in places like this. His hoodie, once a proud shade of navy blue, had faded into something closer to gray. The seams along the cuffs were frayed from years of wear. and the sneakers on his feet told their own story, creases across the leather, scuffed soles, faint stains that no amount of scrubbing could erase. He carried himself quietly, shoulders slightly drawn inward, as though shrinking himself might make him less noticeable. Yet his eyes betrayed him deep brown and bright with something that looked a lot like hope. They studied the mannequins inside the boutique with an intensity that suggested he wasn't just seeing clothes. He was seeing possibilities, ideas, sparking in a mind that was already dreaming bigger than his circumstances allowed. In his pocket rested a folded piece of paper, worn soft from being opened and closed so many times. It was a sketch's latest design, one of many he'd drawn late at night when the world around him finally grew still. Marcus had no money to spend on luxuries, but he saved every dollar he could from odd jobs, sweeping floors, stocking shelves, tutoring younger kids in math. His dream wasn't to buy from boutiques like this, but to one day create something of his own, clothes that told stories. Clothes that gave people confidence instead of taking it away. As Marcus stood there, absorbed in thought, the boutique door swung open with a sharp chime. Out stepped Victoria. She was everything the boutique promised. Her black blazer was tailored so precisely it looked sculpted to her body. A silk scarf in muted gold draped around her neck, catching the light with every slight movement. Her heels clicked against the pavement in crisp, authoritative beats, each step deliberate, like a punctuation mark in a sentence only she controlled. Her hair, styled in soft waves, framed a face that bore the polish of expensive skincare and subtle makeup. She looked like she belonged not just in the boutique, but above it, like she had been born for this world of elegance and exclusivity. Victoria's boutique wasn't merely a store, it was her empire. She had built her reputation on exclusivity, selling not just clothes, but the promise of sophistication. Customers didn't come to her for fabric, they came for validation, for the chance to align themselves with her brand, and she relished it. The compliments, the social media mentions, the whispers of admiration as she passed through the shopping district. All of it fed into the confidence she wore, as naturally as perfume. When her eyes fell on Marcus, she slowed. He hadn't noticed her yet. His attention was still locked on the mannequin in the display window, its smooth body dressed in a cream-colored jacket that looked effortless yet impossibly expensive. The corners of his mouth twitched upward, as if he were imagining how he might redesign it, how he might make it his own. Victoria tilted her head, taking in his hoodie, his sneakers. The way his posture leaned forward with quiet longing, to her. It wasn't hope she saw in his eyes, it was intrusion. Her lips pressed into a line, and in that moment, the air shifted. Marcus finally looked up. Their eyes met through the faint reflection in the glass, and for a heartbeat, there was silence. He saw a woman who seemed untouchable, who carried the air of someone used to being obeyed. She saw a boy who didn't belong, who threatened the pristine image she curated so carefully. The crowd moved around them, oblivious. Shoppers passed by, conversations blending into the background hum. Yet here at the entrance of the boutique, two worlds collided. Victoria took a step closer, her perfume drifting into the air between them, floral and sharp. She regarded Marcus as though weighing his very existence against the reputation of her brand. To her, appearances were everything, and his worn clothes whispered a story she didn't want anywhere near her storefront. Marcus felt it. Then the prickle of judgment crawling across his skin. He shifted slightly, sliding his hands into his hoodie pocket, gripping the sketch folded inside. He had faced stares before, whispers in hallways, the quiet cruelty of assumptions. But this was different. This was direct. This was powerful. And though he didn't yet know it, this moment, this collision at the boutique door would unravel more than just his afternoon. It was set in motion, a story neither of them could have predicted. The sun glared against the glass, casting both their reflections together, the boy with faded sneakers and the woman in tailored silk. To the outside world, it was just another afternoon, just another passing encounter. But to fate, it was the spark before a fire, the first crack in a world that would never look the same again. Marcus lingered in front of the window, his breath fogging the glass faintly as he leaned closer to study the jacket on display. It wasn't just fabric to him. He noticed the stitching, the way the seams flowed like lines in a sketch, how the folds of the material seemed to move even while standing still. He thought about how he might change the cut, soften the shoulders, or swap the muted cream for a bolder hue. His mind turned every garment into a puzzle, each detail sparking a new idea. For a moment, the noise of the street faded. He didn't hear the chatter, the laughter spilling from the cafe across the road, or the faint strum of the busker's guitar. All he saw was possibility. His hand slipped into his hoodie pocket and brushed against the folded sketch inside, as though reassuring himself that the dream was still there, still alive. Then a voice sliced through the warmth of his thought, sharp, deliberate, and dripping with condescension. "Well," Victoria said, her heels clicking against the pavement as she drew closer. "What an interesting choice of window to stop at." Marcus startled slightly, turning his head toward her. She was standing just a step away, arms crossed, her gaze sweeping over him with the precision of someone appraising merchandise and finding it defective. Her lips curved into a smile, but there was no kindness in it. He blinked, unsure how to respond, his body suddenly aware of every frayed thread on his hoodie, every crease in his sneakers. Victoria let the silence stretch before continuing, her voice pitched just loud enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "You know," she said coolly, "our brand isn't really meant for kids who can't even dress properly." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus froze. His chest tightened as though invisible hands had pressed against it. He wanted to look away, to vanish into the crowd, but his eyes betrayed him, locking on hers in shock. He wasn't naive. He had been dismissed before, overlooked, underestimated. But this was deliberate, public. Shoppers slowed their pace, subtle glances flicking toward the scene. A young couple paused just a few steps away, their shopping bags swinging idly at their sides as they exchanged a quick look. A man sipping coffee outside the cafe lowered his cup, frowning slightly. Even the busker seemed to strum a little softer, his eyes darting toward the confrontation. But no one spoke. No one stepped forward. Victoria thrived in that silence. She tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "This boutique," she went on, gesturing toward the gleaming window, "represents elegance, sophistication, not whatever it is you're wearing." Her manicured hand flicked toward his hoodie and sneakers as though brushing away dust. He crawled up Marcus's neck, his face burning. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, the heavy judgment pressed against his back by strangers who didn't know his story. His fingers curled tightly inside his pocket, crumpling the sketch he had kept safe for weeks. He swallowed, forcing down the lump in his throat. His instinct screamed at him to leave, to escape the humiliation tightening around him like a noose, and yet he couldn't move. Something about her words pinned him to the spot, as though this moment was demanding he endure it. However painful, the air around them shifted. Conversations that once buzzed freely now turned hushed, cautious. It was as though the entire street leaned in, waiting to see what would happen next, while also too afraid to intervene. Victoria's eyes glittered with satisfaction. To her, this was order being restored, a reminder that her boutique was not a playground for dreamers, but a sanctuary for the select. She relished the way the boy's shoulders slumped slightly, how the brightness in his gaze dimmed beneath her words. It reaffirmed her power, her place above him, but she didn't see everything. She didn't see how Marcus's jaw clenched, how the humiliation carved something deeper than shame. Beneath the sting, beneath the hurt, something else began to form, quiet, steady, unyielding. The crowd may not have noticed, but fate did. The tension hung heavy, almost tangible, a silence thick enough to choke on. People shuffled uneasily, their eyes darting away as though pretending not to witness the cruelty unfolding before them. Yet their ears remained tuned, their curiosity rooting them in place. Marcus finally shifted, breaking the stillness. He drew in a breath, steadying himself, then dropped his gaze from Victoria's piercing stare. Without a word, he turned slightly, as though preparing to walk away. The faintest tremor lingered in his hands, betraying the storm he carried inside. Victoria gave a small, satisfied nod, as if dismissing him had been no different from brushing lint off her blazer. She turned her head toward a pair of women lingering near the door, offering them a polite smile as though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But ordinary it was not. Though Marcus's voice remained unspoken, though the crowd stayed silent, the air carried the echo of her words. They clung to him like shadows, but they also left an imprint on the street itself. Those who had witnessed the moment would remember it, even if they pretended not to, and Marcus, though shaken, though wounded, was far from broken. As he stepped back from the boutique, the sunlight caught his reflection in the glass once more. Beside the mannequins in their pristine outfits, his figure looked small, almost fragile. Yet if one looked closer, there was something else, something that hinted that this boy The one she had dismissed so easily carried within him a spark no cruelty could extinguish. The boutique door closed behind Victoria with a soft chime, sealing her world of silk and mirrors. But outside, Marcus lingered in the sunlight, holding onto the folded sketch in his pocket as though it were the last thread keeping him upright. And though no one said it aloud, everyone who saw knew this moment had left a mark. A wound, yes, but also a seed. Something had been set into motion, quiet but unstoppable, born from humiliation yet destined to grow into something far greater than anyone could imagine. Marcus stepped back from the boutique, the sting of humiliation still hot against his skin. The laughter and chatter of the shopping district returned, but it no longer sounded the same. The voices of strangers seemed distant, muffled, as though he were moving through water. His sneakers scuffed against the pavement as he walked away slowly, each step heavy with the weight of what had just happened. And yet, beneath the ache, something shifted. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, and though his lips pressed tight, his eyes dark, sharp, alive refused to dim. Pain was there, yes, but pain was familiar. What lingered more strongly was determination, rising like an ember refusing to be smothered. He kept his head down, not out of shame, but out of focus, as though holding fast to an inner resolve only he could feel. Across the street, seated at one of the cafe's small outdoor tables, a man had been watching. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, dressed in a slate gray suit that fit him effortlessly. The kind of man whose confidence wasn't loud, but quietly commanding. A leather briefcase rested by his feet, and a pair of thin-framed glasses perched on his nose, glinting in the sunlight each time he tilted his head. He had noticed Marcus before the scene unfolded, noticed how long the boy lingered at the boutique window, how intently he studied the clothes as though memorizing every detail. The man had even smiled faintly at the sight, reminded of something in himself years ago. But when Victoria's voice cut through the air, when her words turned sharp and cruel, his attention locked fully onto them. He saw the way Marcus flinched, but didn't crumble. He saw the way his jaw set, the quiet strength in his silence. Many people had witnessed the moment, but unlike the others, this man didn't look away. He didn't pretend it hadn't happened. Something about the boy's composure, about the stubborn spark in his gaze as he finally walked away, stirred curiosity in him. No, more than curiosity, it stirred recognition. The man rose from his seat, slipping a few bills onto the table without bothering to wait for change. He adjusted his glasses and picked up his briefcase, then began moving through the crowd with deliberate ease, following at a measured distance. Marcus didn't notice. His mind was a storm of thoughts, swirling between the sting of humiliation and the stubborn fire of defiance. He drifted past a row of pop-up stalls where vendors called out their deals: cheap sunglasses, handmade bracelets, street food wrapped in paper. The scents of grilled meat and spices wafted through the air, but he barely registered them. His hand remained in his hoodie pocket, fingers brushing against the sketch inside. As though holding onto it could anchor him, the man kept his pace unhurried. Blending with the crowd, never close enough to draw attention, his gaze stayed fixed on Marcus, studying the way the boy moved, slightly hunched, yet steady, as though shielding something precious inside himself. He noticed how Marcus stopped briefly at a crosswalk, his eyes scanning the ground, lost in thought. Something about him reminded the man of the beginning of his own journey. He remembered the early days, the long nights when ambition outpaced resources, when belief in himself was the only currency he had. And he remembered, too, the voices that had tried to diminish him, voices like Victoria's. Perhaps that was why he couldn't turn away now. Marcus crossed into a quieter street, where the bustle of the shopping district began to thin. The buildings here were older, the sidewalks cracked in places, the storefronts less polished. A small cafe with mismatched chairs sat at the corner, its terrace shaded by an awning striped in faded red and white. Marcus slowed as though drawn to it, then slipped inside, letting the bell over the door chime softly behind him. The man paused outside, watching through the window as Marcus slid into a booth at the back. From his pocket, the boy pulled out the folded sheet of paper, the sketch, and smoothed it flat on the table. His head bent low as he traced lines with his finger. Lost in the world of his own creation, the man's lips curved slightly. There, it was the truth behind the spark in the boy's eyes. This wasn't just admiration for clothes in a window. This was vision, passion. He could see it in the way Marcus's shoulders relaxed when he looked at his design, in the faint glimmer of pride that returned to his face, For a moment, the man stood still, torn between hesitation and impulse. Approaching a stranger was never simple, especially a boy so guarded, so clearly carrying both pain and pride in equal measure. Yet something deep within told him this was not chance. This was one of those rare intersections life offered where paths cross for a reason. Adjusting his grip on the briefcase, the man finally stepped forward. Pushing open the cafe door, the bell chimed again, blending with the low murmur of conversation inside. He ordered a coffee at the counter, his tone calm, practiced. Before casually scanning the room and allowing his gaze to settle on the boy at the back, Marcus didn't look up. His world, for now, was paper and lines, a dream pressed into graphite. The man carried his cup to a nearby table, close enough to observe, far enough to give space. He studied Marcus in silence, curiosity deepening into something sharper. Opportunity, perhaps, or destiny. Victoria, back at her boutique, had already dismissed the boy as nothing. But across the street, someone else had seen what she could not. And in the quiet corner of a modest cafe, with sketches spread out under trembling fingers, Marcus's story was no longer invisible. It had just begun to be seen. The cafe hummed with a gentle kind of life. Cups clinked softly against saucers. Steam hissed from the espresso machine, and the low murmur of conversations filled the air like background music. In the corner booth, Marcus sat hunched over a spiral-bound notebook, his pencil moving quickly across the page. The paper was already crowded with lines, some sharp, some sweeping, forming shapes that only he seemed able to see clearly. This was his sanctuary. Away from the glimmering boutiques and their judgmental eyes, he could breathe. The notebook in front of him wasn't just paper, it was a world of possibility. Pages overflowed with designs that lived only in his imagination, jackets with bold, geometric cuts, sneakers with color patterns inspired by sunsets, dresses that flowed like water yet held an edge of rebellion. To Marcus, fashion wasn't about money or prestige. It was about expression, telling stories with fabric, giving people armor against a world that judged to quickly dot as he bent closer. Shading the curve of a sleeve, his tongue poked out slightly. In concentration, for the first time since leaving the boutique, his shoulders eased. The sting of Victoria's words dulled under the rhythm of creation. At the nearby table, the well-dressed man who had followed him watched quietly. He sipped his coffee slowly, his gaze thoughtful. It was an idle curiosity that kept him there. It was recognition. The intensity with which Marcus worked, the unguarded passion in each stroke of his pencil, reminded him of countless young designers he had scouted in the past. Some had burned bright and faded. A rare few had risen, reshaping entire industries. Finally, the man stood, smoothing the lapel of his gray suit jacket. He crossed the room with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. It stopped just at the edge of Marcus's table. "You've got quite the focus there," he said, his voice warm yet steady. Marcus looked up, startled. His instinct was to shield the notebook, to curl an arm protectively over his designs. His eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering. Strangers didn't usually take interest in him, at least. Not the good kind. The man raised a hand gently, as if to reassure. "Don't worry. I'm not here to criticize. Quite the opposite, actually." Marcus studied him carefully, the tailored suit, the calm expression, the faint trace of sincerity in his eyes. Still, caution lingered in his voice when he replied, "It's just sketches. Nothing important." The man's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. That's what every great designer says before the world notices them. He extended a hand. "My name's Daniel Carter. I work in fashion investment, talent scouting. Mostly, I look for people with ideas worth bringing to life." Marcus hesitated. The words felt too good, too polished, like something rehearsed. His fingers tapped the edge of the notebook nervously. "And you followed me here?" he asked, a mix of suspicion and curiosity in his tone. Daniel chuckled softly, lowering his hand but not his interest. "I was across the street. I saw what happened outside that boutique." His eyes softened. "I saw the way you didn't break, even when you had every reason to. That kind of composure, that kind of fire. I don't ignore it." Marcus's jaw tightened at the memory, shame threatening to surface again. But Daniel's words, spoken without pity, landed differently, not as an insult, not as a wound, but as recognition. "May I?" Daniel asked, gesturing to the notebook. Marcus's instinct screamed no. His designs were personal, his secret world. Yet something in Daniel's demeanor, calm, steady, respectful made him pause, slowly, reluctantly. He slid the notebook an inch toward the edge of the table. Daniel sat down, across from him, opening the cover with deliberate care. He turned the pages one by one, his brows lifting slightly, his mouth settling into a thoughtful line. He didn't rush, didn't skim. He studied each drawing as though it mattered, as though it deserved attention. These, Daniel said finally, tapping a page where Marcus had drawn a jacket with angular shoulders and a hidden zipper that curved diagonally, are not the sketches of a kid doodling for fun. This is vision, raw, yes, unpolished, of course, but vision nonetheless. Heat rose in Marcus's cheeks. He didn't know whether it was pride or embarrassment. They're just ideas, he muttered. I don't even have the money to. Daniel held up a hand. Ideas are where everything begins. Money, resources, those can come later. But vision, that can't be taught. You either have it or you don't. And you, Marcus, you have it. The boy's name on Daniel's lips startled him. He hadn't introduced himself. Daniel caught the flicker in his eyes and explained with a faint smile. It was on the corner of one of your sketches. Signed, Marcus L. You don't just design, you claim your work. That tells me you're serious, whether you admit it or not. Marcus sat back, the pencil still in his hand trembling slightly. No one had ever spoken of his sketches like this. At school, teachers saw them as distractions. At home, his mother loved him but urged him to focus on practical jobs, the kind that paid bills. To the world, his notebook was nothing but scribbles. Yet here was a stranger, speaking as though those lines on paper held weight. Daniel leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. I want to see more, not just today. I want to see what else you've got, what else you dream up when no one's looking. Because, Marcus, I think you might have something the world doesn't even know it needs yet. The words settled between them like a spark waiting for fuel. Marcus stared down at his notebook, then back at Daniel, caught between disbelief and a growing sense of possibility. The cafe around them carried on, oblivious to the quiet shift unfolding in its corner booth. Cups clinked, laughter echoed, music played faintly from the speakers. Yet for Marcus, the world had tilted. A door he hadn't even known existed had cracked open, just wide enough to let in light. The audience, watching this story unfold, would feel it too, that subtle tremor of change. Something bigger was forming here, a future neither Marcus nor Victoria could yet imagine, stitched together by the courage of a boy and the recognition of a man who chose to see him. Weeks slipped by, and the city shifted from the warmth of late afternoons to the crispness of evenings. That hinted at a change of season. For Marcus, life no longer moved in the same rhythm it once had. Days that had been filled with sketching in solitude were now brimming with phone calls, fabric samples, and late nights hunched over a borrowed sewing machine in Daniel's studio. Daniel had kept his word. With quiet efficiency, he connected Marcus to small manufacturers who believed in giving young designers a chance. He introduced him to photographers, stylists, and even a web developer who owed Daniel a favor. Piece by piece, Marcus's notebook sketches began to breathe in the real world. Hoodies once confined to pencil lines became tangible cotton, with bold seams and colors Marcus had chosen with trembling hands. Sneakers he had imagined in his school notebooks were mocked up into prototypes that gleamed under studio lights. The first photo shoot felt surreal. Marcus stood off to the side, heart pounding as models, kids not much older than him, posed in clothing he had designed. He had expected to feel small, out of place, but as the camera shutters clicked, he realized something extraordinary. His vision looked even more powerful off the page. Daniel launched the online collection quietly, with no flashy marketing, just a simple website and a few posts on social media. If the work is good, he told Marcus, people will find it, and if they believe in it, they'll spread it faster than any ad campaign could. At first, the response trickled in slowly: likes, a few shares, comments from strangers asking where they could buy the hoodie with the asymmetric zipper or the jacket that seemed to fold around the body like origami. But then something shifted. A local influencer stumbled upon the collection, posting a photo in one of Marcus's hoodies with the caption, "This design is insane. Who's behind this?" The spark caught. Within days, Marcus's designs were circulating across platforms, shared on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Teenagers filmed videos styling his jackets in their bedrooms. Artists redrew his sneakers in digital fan art. Fashion enthusiasts called his work refreshing and authentic. Orders flooded the website faster than the modest stock could handle. Daniel had to scramble to arrange more production, and Marcus found himself answering emails late into the night, eyes wide as he read praise from people he had never met. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt seen, not just noticed, but recognized for something that came from his own imagination. Every ding of a new order, every comment from a stranger across the country, reminded him that Victoria's words, sharp, dismissive, cruel, had been wrong. But while Marcus's world expanded, Victoria's began to unravel. At first, she dismissed the dip in sales as seasonal. People always tighten their wallets after the holidays. She told her staff, her smile tight, her tone clipped. But soon the whispers reached her, screenshots circulating on Twitter, a short video someone had taken outside her boutique that day. Her words, captured and shared, "Our brand isn't really meant for kids who can't even dress properly." It spread like wildfire. Hashtags emerged, hashtag not for kids, hashtag fashion for all, carried by young people who had grown tired of exclusivity, disguised as sophistication. The same teenagers who once saved for months to buy a single piece from her boutique now turned their backs. Influencers who had once tagged her brand in glossy posts deleted their partnerships, unwilling to be associated with her cruelty. Protesters even appeared outside the boutique one weekend, holding handmade signs that read, "Respect is always in style, and we belong here too." Customers who once lingered outside her store now crossed the street deliberately, avoiding the gleaming glass windows that had once drawn them in. Inside, Victoria's empire crumbled. Racks of clothing went unsold. Mannequins stood draped in outfits no one wanted to claim. Staff quit quietly, slipping away one by one, unwilling to work under a brand drowning in scandal. For the first time in years, Victoria found herself walking into her store to silence not the hum of chatter, not the click of heels on polished floors, but silence heavy enough to rattle her. And as her world dimmed, Marcus's shone brighter. One evening, sitting in the same cafe where it had all begun, Marcus scrolled through his phone in disbelief. A fashion magazine had featured his collection in an article titled "The Teen Designer Who Turned Rejection into Revolution." The words blurred before his eyes as his chest filled with a mix of pride and disbelief. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be known, respected, celebrated, and yet, here he was, proof that resilience could reshape destiny. Daniel, sitting across from him, raised his coffee cup with a smile. "This is just the beginning," he said. "You've done what you can do. You've made people feel something. That's the heart of fashion. Not exclusivity, connection." Marcus lowered his phone, fingers brushing the edge of his notebook. The same notebook that had carried him through quiet nights, through doubt and dismissal, through humiliation at a boutique window. Its pages were still full of ideas, worlds waiting to be stitched together. And outside, the city pulsed with energy, carrying his name farther than he could have ever imagined. The morning sun poured through Victoria's penthouse windows, but his life felt cruel, almost mocking. She sat at her dining table, a glossy magazine spread open before her. Her manicured fingers trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages until they landed on the one she'd been dreading since whispers began swirling in the industry. There was the photograph side by side. On the left, an image of her once proud boutique, glass doors smudged, shelves half empty, a clearance sales sign drooping in the window like a flag of surrender. Beneath it, the headline read, "Fall of a Fashion Icon." On the right, a vibrant photograph of Marcus, 16 years old, yet posed with a quiet strength beyond his years. He stood against a painted mural in one of his own jackets, a bold piece with asymmetrical cuts and patterns that seemed to dance in the light. The caption beneath his photo glowed with praise, "The teen visionary redefining streetwear." Victoria's eyes darted between the two, her chest tightening. But what struck her most wasn't the comparison, it was the commentary. Scrolling through her phone, she saw post after post. Strangers who had once walked past her store in silence now sharing their voices loudly, condemning her treatment of the boy. One viral thread read, "I was there that day. I saw him admiring the clothes, and I heard what she said. I didn't speak up, but I'll never forget his face. I wish I had. I won't be silent anymore." Others chimed in, echoing the same guilt, the same anger. Silence had once protected Victoria, but now it became evidence against her, and with each post, Marcus's name grew louder, brighter, unstoppable. The night of the city's most anticipated fashion gala arrived. The annual event was known for its opulent crystal chandeliers, velvet carpets, and champagne flutes that never seemed empty. It was the kind of night Victoria had once owned, gliding through the room in her finest gown. Paparazzi clamoring for her attention, she dressed carefully. Determined to reclaim some semblance of dignity, a sleek black gown hugged her figure. Diamonds glittered at her ears, and her lips were painted in her signature red. She rehearsed the smiles, the nods, the dismissive tilt of her chin that had once commanded respect. But beneath the veneer, her confidence was fragile, fraying at the edges. The grand ballroom buzzed with chatter and anticipation. Fashion editors, celebrities, and investors mingled under golden light, their conversations drifting in and out. Like waves, Victoria stepped inside, spine straight, chin high, but she felt the shift immediately. Whispers followed her, eyes lingered not in admiration, but in judgment. Conversation seemed to hush when she passed, replaced by sidelong glances and barely concealed smirks. She clenched her clutch tighter, forcing herself to glide toward the main hall. And then she saw at the center of the room stood the Knights' main showcase, a glowing runway surrounded by spotlights. Across the giant screen overhead, letters appeared bold and unyielding, introducing Marcus Williams, the new voice of fashion. The breath caught in Victoria's throat. For a moment, the room tilted. She scanned the crowd, searching for disbelief, for someone else who found this absurd. But all she found were faces lit with anticipation, eyes hungry for the collection they had come to celebrate, not hers. Music swelled, pulsing through the hall as the runway came alive. Models strode forward in Marcus's creations, hoodies reimagined as high art, sneakers with daring silhouettes, jackets that blended streetwear with elegance. Each piece carried the unmistakable stamp of originality, the kind Victoria once claimed only her brand possessed. The crowd erupted in cheers, applause echoing off the high ceilings. Phones rose in unison, flashes exploding as if to immortalize every second. And at the end of the runway, stepping hesitantly yet proudly into the light, was Marcus himself. He wore one of his own designs, a tailored jacket layered over a hoodie, a fusion that spoke of where he came from and where he was headed. His eyes scanned the room, not with arrogance, but with quiet wonder. As though he still couldn't believe this was real, the applause swelled into a standing ovation. Editors rose to their feet, influencers shouted his name, investors leaned forward with gleaming interest. It was a wave of recognition so powerful, so unanimous. It left no room for doubt. Marcus was not just a passing trend. He was the future. Victoria sat frozen in her chair, her hands cold despite the heat of the room. Her eyes burned as she watched the boy she had dismissed mock bask in the kind of glory she once believed belonged only to her. She remembered his faded hoodie, his worn sneakers, his quiet eyes staring into her boutique window. How easy it had been to strip him of dignity with a single sentence. How quick she had been to decide his worth. Now, those same eyes looked out across the crowd with strength, reflecting back all the light she had tried to deny him. The irony was merciless. She had wanted to make him invisible, yet her cruelty had made him unforgettable. She had laughed at the idea of him belonging in her world, and now he stood at its very center, embraced by the very people she had once ruled over. The ovation roared on, relentless, until Marcus lifted the microphone. His voice was steady, humble, carrying across the ballroom with a gravity that silenced even the clinking of glasses. I was told once that I didn't belong in fashion because of how I looked, because of what I wore. Tonight, I'm standing here to prove that creativity doesn't belong to the privileged. It belongs to anyone with a vision and the courage to chase it. The crowd erupted again, louder than before. Victoria lowered her gaze, her chest tightening as shame pressed down heavier than the diamonds at her ears. For the first time, she had no words, no mask to hide behind, only the bitter realization that she had not just lost her brand, she had lost the story she told herself about who she was. And across the hall, Marcus shone brighter than she had ever imagined possible. The gala's applause still echoed like thunder when Marcus stepped back from the microphone. His chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of relief, his eyes glistening under the stage lights. The ovation wasn't just for the clothes on the runway, it was for the story they carried, stitched into every scene, woven from every hardship he had endured. He didn't linger in the spotlight, didn't revel in the glow of triumph. Instead, Marcus bowed his head with humility, as though the moment belonged not only to him, but to everyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or silenced. "Thank you," he said once more, his voice quieter now, but still ringing with sincerity. I wouldn't be here without the people who believed in me when it would have been easier to walk away. To those who reminded me that kindness matters, even when the world is unkind, you're the reason I kept going. This is for all of us who dare to dream, no matter what anyone says. The audience rose again, clapping until the air trembled with their approval. Some dabbed at their eyes. Others cheered his name, their voices blending into a chorus of affirmation. From the corner of the room, Victoria sat rigid, her knuckles white against the stem of her wine glass. She couldn't look away, though every word felt like a blade, slicing through the carefully constructed armor she had worn for decades. She had built her empire on exclusivity, on drawing lines between those who were deemed worthy and those who were not. But now, she was witnessing the collapse of everything she had stood for, not at the hands of a rival mogul or market downturn, but by the quiet persistence of a boy she had mocked without a second thought. Marcus didn't mention her name, didn't call her out, didn't seek vengeance. His silence toward her was louder than condemnation could ever be. He had no need to drag her down. He was already rising, carried upward by a tide of respect and admiration she could no longer command. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. As whispers rippled through the tables around her, she heard her own name, hushed and sharp, paired with words like arrogant, cruel, and finished. Once, these rooms had belonged to her. Now, she felt like an intruder, unwanted and unremembered except as a cautionary tale. The irony tasted bitter. Her brand, once a symbol of prestige, had already begun to unravel. Sales reports told the story plainly. Boycotts had emptied her stores. Former customers had turned away in disgust, and once loyal employees now sought work elsewhere. What took her 20 years to build had crumbled in months, undone by her own pride. And sitting there in the golden glow of the gala, watching Marcus receive the standing ovation that should have been hers, Victoria realized the truth too late. It wasn't market trends or shifting demographics that had destroyed her empire. It was her arrogance, her cruelty, the sharp tongue she had wielded so freely. Never imagining it could cut her own future to pieces, she glanced toward the runway again. Marcus stood surrounded by photographers and well-wishers, his smile humble, his presence calm. He wasn't celebrating her downfall. He wasn't thinking about her at all. That, more than anything, stung, because while she burned with humiliation, Marcus had already moved on, his eyes fixed on horizons far beyond her reach. Later that evening, as the gala wound down and the crowd began to disperse into the city's glittering night, Marcus slipped quietly out a side door. He carried only his sketchbook under his arm, the same one he had once hunched over in a cafe, filling his pages with designs that no one was supposed to see. The city air was cool, carrying the hum of distant traffic and the faint buzz of neon signs. Marcus inhaled deeply, the weight of the night finally settling into something he could carry. He thought of his mother, who had worked long hours so he could have pencils and paper. He thought of his friends who had cheered him on, even when his ideas seemed too big, too impossible. And he thought of the man who had noticed him when no one else had, who had taken a chance on a kid with worn sneakers and a stubborn dream. For a moment, he allowed himself a small smile, not of triumph, but of gratitude. Inside the ballroom, Victoria lingered in the shadows, avoiding the photographers, slipping out the back unnoticed. The city lights seemed harsher now, their brilliance a reminder of everything she had lost. She wrapped her coat tightly around herself, but it couldn't warm her against the chill that came not from the air, but from within. For the first time in years, she felt small, and in that smallness, an unfamiliar ache took root. Regret, for the boy she had dismissed, for the kindness she had scorned, for the empire she had believed untouchable. But regret, she knew, was useless now. The world had moved on, and Marcus had risen beyond her reach. The story closed not with revenge, but with revelation. Marcus didn't need to destroy her. She had done that herself. His greatest answer to her cruelty was his success, earned through resilience, vision, and the quiet power of kindness. And though Victoria would never say it aloud, she knew the truth in her bones. Empires built on arrogance cannot stand, but dreams fueled by humility, courage, and hope can rise higher than anyone dares to imagine. That night, as Marcus walked home beneath the stars, his sketchbook pressed to his chest, he carried no bitterness, only the certainty that he belonged not because of what he wore, but because of who he was. And somewhere behind him, in the shadows of her own undoing, Victoria finally understood what it meant to lose everything. not to an enemy, but to the reflection of her own pride. The city was quieter now, the gala's lights dimmed behind them, laughter and music fading into the night like echoes of a world that already belonged to yesterday. Marcus walked steadily along the pavement, his sketchbook clutched to his chest, his sneakers scuffing against the concrete. To the casual passerby, he looked like any other teenager headed home after a long day. But to those who had watched his journey unfold, he was proof of something greater, something that could not be sewn into fabric or sold in stores. Success had not hardened him. If anything, it had softened him further, smoothing away the edges of pain and replacing them with gratitude. He hadn't needed to shout, to fight, or to drag anyone down to prove himself. His answer to cruelty was creation. His reply to scorn was perseverance. And in the end, those had spoken louder than any insult. Victoria, meanwhile, drove through the same city under the cover of tinted glass, the weight of her silence pressing against her like chains. Her empire was crumbling, her name slipping from admiration into ridicule. Yet the greatest punishment was not financial loss or damaged reputation, it was the knowledge that she had done this to herself. The night revealed truths she had ignored for too long. That arrogance blinds, that cruelty corrodes, and that respect freely given and freely received is the only currency that never loses its value. Days later, an article began to circulate online. It wasn't about profits or losses, but about a lesson people had nearly forgotten. Respect costs nothing. The headline read, bold against the backdrop of Marcus's smile. But arrogance can cost you everything. The piece described how a single cruel comment had set into motion a chain of events that reshaped lives. How a boy, dismissed for his faded hoodie and worn shoes, had risen not by spite, but by vision. And how a woman, once powerful, had crumbled under the weight of her own disdain. Had struck a chord. Parents read it aloud at dinner tables, reminding their children that kindness matters more than appearances. Teachers clipped it for classroom walls, underlining the value of character over clothing. Even strangers in cafes murmured about it, as if the city itself had been reminded of something simple yet profound. Marcus never sought to become a symbol, but life has a way of elevating those who stand quietly firm, even when the world sneers. One afternoon, weeks later, Marcus returned to that same shopping district where it had all begun. The boutiques glistened in the afternoon sun, the cafes hummed with chatter, and pop-up stalls spilled laughter and color into the streets. It felt almost the same as before, except everything was different. He stopped for a moment in front of Victoria's old boutique. The glass windows were covered with for-lease signs, the once polished door now dulled by dust. The empire that had stood as a monument to exclusivity was gone, erased by silence. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He only stared for a moment, then lowered his gaze to the sketchbook in his hands. His empire was not in glass windows or marble floors. It was in his ideas, his persistence, his ability to see beauty where others saw nothing. As he walked away, a group of young teens spotted him, their eyes lighting up in recognition. One wore a hoodie that bore his design, another clutched a tote bag printed with his logo. They waved, shy but eager. Marcus waved back, the warmth in his chest spreading like sunlight. He had become what Victoria never understood, not just a designer, but a mirror of hope. Proof that worth is never about the clothes you wear, but the story you carry. The moral of it all lingered in the air, as clear as the blue sky overhead. Respect costs nothing. Not a dime, not a dollar, not a sacrifice of pride. Yet it has the power to build bridges, to uplift strangers, to turn chance encounters into lifelines. Arrogance, though, is expensive. It takes and takes until nothing is left. It isolates, erodes, and blinds until even empires collapse under its weight. And true worth, it cannot be bought. It cannot be measured by fabric labels or polished storefronts. It lives in character, in creativity, in kindness, the quiet, resilient forces that outlast every trend. Years later, when Marcus's name had become synonymous with innovation, young designers would ask him what advice he carried from his journey. He always answered the same, his voice steady, his smile modest. Respect people, create with love. Remember that what you wear might turn heads, but who you are, that's what changes the world. And with those words, the lesson that had begun on a bright afternoon outside a boutique was passed on again and again, stitched into the fabric of countless futures. Because in the end, clothes fade, brands collapse, and names are forgotten. But kindness humble, Enduring, unpretentious never goes out of style.